They told us we would be paid for our work, but I thought it was a lie to make us cooperate," Liesel said to the woman beside her in the processing line, her voice barely above a whisper. The air inside the intake building smelled of disinfectant and fresh paint, nothing like the damp concrete and diesel she had expected. Liesel Richter stood with 47 other women who had been captured in North Africa, transported across an ocean, and deposited at a camp somewhere in the flat heart of the American Southwest. The floor beneath her worn boots was swept clean. A sergeant behind a wooden table was handing each woman ahead of her a folded set of clothing, a towel, and a small card printed in both English and German. When Liesel reached the table, the sergeant looked up from his clipboard, met her eyes without hostility, and slid the card across the surface. She picked it up. The German text read, "You will receive 80 cents per day for work performed. Wages paid monthly. Canteen purchases permitted with earned credits." She read it twice. The woman behind her nudged forward, and Liesel moved on, clutching the card as though it might vanish. The barracks smelled of pine and sawdust, the walls still showing pale streaks where the lumber had been planed smooth. Liesel set her folded clothes on the iron cot assigned to her and sat down. The mattress gave slightly under her weight, stuffed with something that felt like straw but cleaner, the ticking unstained. Across the aisle, a woman named Margaret was smoothing her hand over a wool blanket, gray and military issue, but thick enough to hold warmth. Liesel had spent 3 months in a holding facility in Casablanca, sleeping on a cement floor with a single threadbare cover shared among 5 women. She had expected more of the same here, or worse. She had heard stories about camps in the Soviet zones, about rations cut to starvation levels and labor without rest. But the card in her hand said wages. It said purchases. It said canteen. She did not understand what kind of place this was. The first work detail came the next morning. A guard led Liesel and 11 other women to a kitchen facility behind the mess hall, a long building with preparation tables and ovens that kept the air warm. The supervisor, an older woman in a crisp uniform who spoke no German, demonstrated how to peel potatoes, how to measure flour, how to work the large mixing bowls. Liesel worked for 6 hours, her hands red from the cold water, her back aching from standing, but the work had a rhythm, a predictability. No one shouted. No one struck her when she misunderstood an instruction. At noon, the supervisor gestured for them to stop, and another woman brought in a tray of sandwiches, white bread with cheese and thin slices of ham, and enamel cups of coffee that tasted bitter but strong. Liesel ate slowly, aware that the bread was soft, that the cheese was real, that no one was taking it away. When the shift ended, the supervisor marked something in a ledger beside each of their names. Liesel did not ask what it meant. She returned to the barracks and lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling beams. At the end of the first week, the women were assembled in the mess hall after dinner. An officer stood at the front with a translator, a young man whose German carried a Bavarian accent. The officer spoke briefly, and the translator relayed the words. Each woman had earned $5.60. The canteen would open the following afternoon. They could purchase toiletries, stationery, small luxuries. Liesel felt something tighten in her chest. She had not held money since before her capture. She had not been permitted to own anything that was not issued or approved. The idea that she could walk into a building and choose something to buy, something that belonged to her, felt unreal. Beside her, Margaret was crying quietly, her shoulders shaking. Liesel reached over and gripped her wrist, and Margaret gripped back. The canteen was housed in a converted storage shed painted white, its shelves stocked with bars of soap, tubes of toothpaste, writing paper, envelopes, pencils, hairpins, small mirrors, tins of hard candy, and packages of biscuits. A sign behind the counter listed prices in clear black numbers. Liesel stood just inside the door, overwhelmed by the simple abundance. She had expected nothing. She had imagined being worked until she was no longer useful, then discarded or traded or forgotten. She had not imagined this. A woman ahead of her in line purchased a bar of rose soap and a tin of lemon drops, and when she turned away from the counter, she was smiling. Liesel stepped forward. The man behind the counter, a civilian with wire-rimmed glasses, looked at her, and waited. She pointed to a package of writing paper and a pencil. He took them down, checked her account card, and handed them to her along with a receipt printed on thin paper. She held the items against her chest and walked out into the afternoon light, feeling the weight of them in her hands. That night, Liesel sat on her cot with the paper in her lap and the pencil between her fingers. She had not written to anyone in 18 months. Her family was somewhere in the Eastern Territories, beyond any postal route she could imagine. But having the paper, having the pencil meant she could try. It meant she was still a person who could form words and send them into the world. She wrote the date at the top of the page, then paused. She did not know what to say. She wrote her cousin Emma's name. She wrote, "I am safe." She wrote, "They are treating us well." She stopped, staring at the sentence, wondering if anyone would believe it. She had not believed it herself a week ago, but it was true. She folded the paper and tucked it under her pillow. She would finish it tomorrow. The work became routine. Liesel spent her mornings in the kitchen, her hands moving through the motions of peeling and chopping and washing dishes in sinks filled with scalding water. The air smelled of onions and flour, sharp and clean. In the afternoons, she and a small group of women were assigned to the tailoring shop, mending uniforms and repairing torn clothing with needles and thread. The supervisor, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache, spoke a little German, and sometimes told them jokes that made no sense until someone translated. He never raised his voice. He handed out extra biscuits at the end of the shift, still warm from the kitchen, and told them to take them. Liesel's wages accumulated. At the end of the second week, she had $11. She returned to the canteen and bought a small blue journal, a handkerchief, and a tin of pears. She ate the pears slowly, one slice at a time, savoring the sweetness, the syrup coating her tongue. Other women began to talk about what they would buy when they had saved enough. Margaret wanted a woolen scarf. Another woman, Christina, wanted writing paper and stamps to send letters home, even though no one knew if the letters would arrive. Liesel listened to their plans and felt something strange unfurling in her chest, something that felt like hope, but quieter, more cautious. She had learned not to trust comfort. She had learned that kindness could be a prelude to cruelty, that small mercies could be withdrawn without warning, but the wages kept coming. The canteen kept opening. The work continued, steady and predictable, and no one told them it would end. One afternoon in late autumn, Liesel was chopping vegetables in the kitchen when the supervisor called her over. The woman held out a small envelope and pointed to Liesel's name written on the front in careful block letters. Liesel took it confused. She had not expected mail. She had not believed anyone knew where she was. She opened the envelope carefully, her fingers trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter from her cousin Emma in Dresden. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, the ink smudged in places, but the words were unmistakable. Her family was alive. They were struggling, but they were alive. Emma wrote that she had received Liesel's letter through the Red Cross, that she could not believe Liesel was being treated well, that she hoped it was true. Liesel read the letter 3 times, then pressed it against her chest and wept. The supervisor glanced over, said something soft in English, and left her alone. That evening, Liesel went to the canteen and bought a second package of writing paper. She sat on her cot under the single bulb that lit the barracks and wrote a long letter to Emma describing the camp, the work, the wages, the canteen. She described the tin of pears, the rose soap, the clean blankets. She knew it sounded impossible. She knew Emma would read it and wonder if she was lying, if the letter had been censored or coerced, but it was the truth. She sealed the envelope and handed it to the mail clerk the next morning, watching as he stamped it and placed it in the outgoing bin. She did not know if it would reach Dresden, but she had done what she could. The other women began to notice small changes in the camp. The mess hall started serving fresh vegetables alongside the usual potatoes and bread. The medical officer visited the barracks once a week, checking for illness, distributing aspirin and bandages without question. A dentist arrived and set up a makeshift clinic in a side building, offering to repair broken teeth or extract infected ones. Liesel had a pain when she chewed, but she had ignored it for months, expecting no help. When the dentist called her name, she sat in the chair, gripping the armrests, and closed her eyes. The dentist spoke gently in English, his assistant translating. He numbed her gum with a swab of something cold and bitter, then worked quickly, filling the cavity with a paste that hardened under his tools. When he finished, he handed her a small mirror so she could see. The tooth was whole again. She touched her jaw, feeling the absence of pain, and thanked him in halting English. He nodded and waved her toward the door. The wages continued. By midwinter, Liesel had saved $23. She bought a pair of woolen socks, a bar of chocolate, and a small comb with a tortoiseshell handle. She kept the chocolate in her footlocker and ate one square each evening, letting it melt on her tongue. The socks were thick and soft, warmer than anything she had owned in years. She wore them to bed, feeling the fabric against her skin, and slept more soundly than she had since before the war. Margaret bought a scarf and wrapped it around her neck during the outdoor roll calls, the wool red and bright against the gray morning light. Christina saved her money and bought nothing, hoarding it in a small cloth pouch she kept under her mattress, planning for something she would not name. In the spring, the camp administration announced that the women could earn additional wages by volunteering for extra shifts in the gardens or the mess hall. Liesel signed up for the gardens, eager to work outside after months indoors. The soil was dark and loamy, smelling of thawed earth and manure. She planted rows of beans and tomatoes, her hands caked with dirt, her knees sinking into the soft ground. The sun warmed her back. The air smelled of growth, of something alive and returning. She worked beside women she had barely spoken to, their silence comfortable, their movements synchronized. At the end of the shift, the supervisor handed each of them an extra $1 and a basket of strawberries, small and sweet, still warm from the sun. Liesel ate 3 on the walk back to the barracks, the juice staining her fingers. The letters from Emma came more regularly now, one every few weeks. Emma wrote about rationing, about rebuilding, about the uncertainty of what would come next. She asked Liesel when she would come home. Liesel did not know how to answer. She did not know if she wanted to go home. Dresden was rubble and hunger and a future that felt like a closing door. Here she had work. She had wages. She had a cot and a blanket and a tin of pears when she wanted it. She had a space that was hers, small and circumscribed, but hers nonetheless. She folded Emma's letters and kept them in her blue journal, a growing stack of paper that smelled faintly of ink and distance. The war ended that summer, though the news reached the camp slowly, filtered through official channels and whispered conversations. Liesel learned of the surrender on a Tuesday morning, standing in the kitchen with her hands submerged in soapy water. The supervisor came in and spoke briefly to the translator, who turned to the women and relayed the information. Germany had surrendered. The war was over. The women stood in silence, unsure how to react. Relief and fear mingled in equal measure. Liesel wrung out a dishcloth and set it aside, her hands moving automatically. She did not know what came next. She did not know if she would be sent home, or kept here, or moved somewhere else. She finished her shift and returned to the barracks, lying on her cot and staring at the ceiling. In late autumn, the camp administration announced that the women would be repatriated in stages beginning in December. Liesel listened to the announcement and felt nothing, a numbness that spread through her chest and settled in her limbs. The night before her departure, Liesel counted the money she had saved. She had spent some, sent some home in parcels when the opportunity arose, but kept most of it folded in a small envelope in her footlocker. She took the envelope and placed it in the bottom of her bag beneath her spare clothes and the blue journal and the letters from Emma. The bus came in the morning, a military vehicle with hard seats and windows fogged with condensation. Liesel climbed aboard with her bag slung over her shoulder, the envelope of money pressing against her side. She sat near the back and looked out the window as the camp receded. Months later, when Liesel had found work in a factory and begun to rebuild a life in the broken city, she took out the blue journal and read what she had written. The words felt distant now, almost unbelievable, a record of something that had happened to someone else. But they were true. She had been a prisoner. She had been paid. She had bought pears and soap and a pencil. She had been treated with dignity in a place where she had expected none.